Obina, look me in the eyes and say you know nothing about this lie. Why should I defend myself before a prince who wants to steal our father's throne?
I have never wished our father dead. I have never touched the sacred royal staff. Someone planted those things in my room, and you know it.
Enough! You are already caught, yet you still want to accuse my son. Shame on you, Chidiebere.
My queen, if I am guilty, may truth punish me. But if I am innocent, may the same truth expose everyone behind this evil.
Stop acting like a saint. You wanted the throne before your time, and now the whole kingdom has seen your true face.
No, Obinna. The kingdom has not seen my true face. The kingdom has only seen the lie you people carefully placed before them.
The morning sun rose gently over the kingdom of Umudike, spreading warm golden light across the red earth, the tall trees, and the wide farms that stretched far beyond the village paths. Roosters crowed from different compounds. Women swept their yards with soft broomsticks. Smoke rose from kitchen huts, and the smell of boiling yam and fresh soup filled the air. It was a peaceful kingdom, rich in food, culture, and joy. And the people often said that peace lived in Umudike because their king, King Ezeudo, was a good man. He was not a ruler who sat in the palace all day while his people suffered. He listened, he cared, he judged fairly, he spoke with calm wisdom, and even when people brought difficult matters before him, he never rushed to anger. Because of this, the people loved him deeply, and they prayed that his reign would last many more years. But if the people loved the king, they loved his first son, Prince Chidiebere, almost just as much. Chidiebere was young, strong, handsome, and kind. But what made him special was not his fine clothes or royal blood. It was his heart. He did not behave like a proud prince. He greeted old men with respect. He bent down to help children. He listened to poor people as if they were chiefs. He walked among farmers, hunters, traders, and widows without fear or pride, and that was why people smiled whenever they saw him. That morning, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, Chidiebere left the palace courtyard with only a few guards behind him. He wore a simple but clean royal wrapper, a light cloth over one shoulder, and leather sandals dusty from many days spent walking village roads. He was going to the farms beyond the stream, where many villagers had complained about insects destroying their crops. When he arrived, he did not stand far away and point like a lazy leader. He stepped into the field himself. He bent down to touch the leaves of yam plants, examined broken stems, and asked careful questions. An old farmer named Nana wiped sweat from his forehead and said, "My prince, look at these leaves. Yesterday they were fresh. Today they look weak. If this continues, many of us will lose food before harvest." Chidiebere's face softened with concern. "Then you will not face it alone. I will speak with the palace storekeepers. We will send help, and I will ask the hunters and young men to clear the wet bushes near the farms. We will fight this problem together." The farmers looked at one another with relief. Nana smiled for the first time that day. "This is why the people trust you. You do not only hear us, you stand with us." Chidiebere gave a small smile. A prince who does not stand with his people is not fit to rule them. The words were simple, but they stayed in their hearts long after he left. From the farms, he traveled to the village square, where two families were in a bitter quarrel over a narrow piece of land between their compounds. The shouting had already drawn a crowd. One elderly man pointed an angry finger and cried, "That boundary belongs to my father's house. His sons have no right to push their fence into our side." A younger man answered sharply, "You lie. The old tree near the path marks the border long before you were born." Voices rose, hands waved, children stood on tiptoe to watch. Chidiebere stepped forward and lifted one hand. "Enough," he said in a firm but calm voice. The noise dropped. Even anger paused when he spoke. He listened to both sides carefully, asked several elders what they remembered, and then walked with them to the land itself. He looked at the tree stump, the old stones buried in the ground, and the worn footpath beside the fence. After some time, he turned to both families. This land was never meant to divide brothers into enemies. The fence was moved too far, but the argument has grown larger than the land. Let the boundary be returned to the old stones, and let both families work together to rebuild it by sunset. No curses, no insults, no revenge. One of the women in the crowd muttered, "He speaks like his father." Another answered, "He will make a great king one day." The two families, ashamed of their public fight, accepted the judgment. The younger man bowed his head. "My prince, forgive my anger." The old man also sighed and said, "Peace is better than this shame." Chidiebere placed a hand on each of them. "Then choose peace," he told them. By midday, the prince had moved again, this time toward the forest edge where hunters were preparing for an expedition. They welcomed him with joy because he often joined them, not for sport alone, but to understand the dangers faced by men who protected the villages from wild animals and raiders. The forest was thick and alive with sound. Birds cried from the branches, insects hummed in the heat, and the smell of damp leaves rose from the ground. Chidiebere moved with alert eyes and steady steps, holding a spear as naturally as if he had been born in the wild. One hunter, a broad-shouldered man named Okoro, laughed as they walked. "Your Highness, one day the people will forget you are a prince and call you Chief Hunter." Chidiebere smiled. "If I can keep the roads safe for farmers and travelers, they may call me anything they like." The men laughed softly. Later, when they heard movement in the bushes, everyone became still. A frightened antelope burst out and ran across their path. One young hunter lifted his spear too fast and nearly stumbled, but Chidiebere caught his arm. "Steady," he whispered. "Do not let fear move before your mind." The young man breathed out slowly. "Thank you, my prince." They returned in the evening with meat and stories, and as they came back toward the village, drums were already sounding in the distance. It was a day of celebration in Umudike. Women had decorated the village square with woven mats and fresh palm fronds. Young girls danced in bright wrappers. Children chased one another in laughter. Men arranged stools beneath shaded trees. The air was full of life, and even the tired earth seemed to shine. Chidiebere entered the celebration with easy grace, greeting elders first, then smiling at the children who ran toward him. "Prince Chidiebere!" they shouted. "Come and watch us dance." He laughed warmly. "Then dance well, and I will watch with both eyes." The children laughed and ran back into the circle. It was there, in the heart of that joyful gathering, that he first saw Adaeze in a way he had never seen her before. She was standing beside a group of women near a water pot, her wrapper tied neatly, her hair beautifully braided, her face calm and gentle. She was not decorated like someone trying to call attention to herself. She was simply graceful. Her beauty did not shout. It rested quietly upon her like morning light. But it was not her face alone that held his eyes. It was what she was doing. An old widow nearby had dropped her small basket of ground pepper, and the powder had spilled into the dust. While others were busy talking and laughing, Adaeze quickly knelt beside the woman. "Mother, do not worry. I will help you." The widow looked close to tears. "My daughter, this was all I brought to sell." Adaeze took a clean cloth, gathered what could be saved, and called to a younger girl. "Bring another small bowl from that table." Then she reached into her own basket and added some pepper she had brought herself. "Take this too. You must not return home empty-handed." The widow held her hand. "May blessings follow you wherever you go." Adaeze smiled. "I only did what anyone should do." Chidiebere had been watching from a short distance. Something in his chest grew still and deep at once. He had seen many beautiful women before, daughters of chiefs, maidens from rich homes, girls dressed in beads and shining cloth. But this was different. This was beauty joined with goodness, and it touched him in a place pride could not reach. One of his friends noticed the way he was looking and leaned closer with a teasing smile. "My prince," he said quietly, "but you have faced hunters, angry elders, and rough journeys without fear, but now you are standing still because of one village maiden." Chidebere gave him a look, but he could not hide the small smile on his face. "Be quiet," he murmured, though his eyes returned to Adaeze. A little later, when the dancing paused and people moved about the square, Adaeze carried a calabash of water to a group of children sitting near the shade. As she turned, she nearly stepped into Chidebere. She stopped at once, lowered her eyes respectfully, and said, "Forgive me, my prince. I did not see you." Chidebere's voice came softer than he expected. "There is nothing to forgive." For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other. Adaeze's eyes were clear and modest, and Chidebere felt strangely aware of the noise around them fading into the background. He spoke again, trying not to sound too eager. "I saw what you did for the old widow." Adaeze shifted the calabash slightly in her hands. "She needed help." Chidebere said, "Many people saw her, few moved." Adaeze answered quietly, "Kindness should not wait for permission." Chidebere smiled fully then, and there was honest admiration in his face. "You speak wisely." A child tugged Adaeze's wrapper at that moment, asking for water, and she bent to serve him first before saying, "Please excuse me, my prince." Chidebere stepped aside. "Of course." He watched her walk away, and even after she left, he remained standing there for a few seconds, as though his heart had been left behind with her. That evening, after the drums grew louder and the dance became more spirited, Chidebere found another chance to speak with her near the edge of the square where women were serving roasted corn and palm fruit. "Do you always spend your time helping others at festivals?" he asked with a light smile. Adaeze looked almost shy, but not frightened. "There is always something to do," she replied. "Someone needs water, someone needs help carrying a basket, someone needs a child watched for a moment." "And who helps you?" Chidebere asked. She looked surprised, then smiled faintly. "My parents raised me well. Their teaching helps me. They must be proud of you." Adaeze lowered her eyes for a second. "I hope so." Chidebere hesitated, then said, "I would like to know you better." Adaeze looked up at him, startled but calm. The sounds of laughter and drums floated around them, yet the moment felt private. "My prince," she said carefully, "I am only a village maiden." Chidebere shook his head. "You are not only anything." His voice held quiet truth. A person's heart is greater than title. Adaeze did not know what to say, but the warmth in her eyes answered more than words. From that day, their paths began to cross more often. Chidebere found reasons to visit the parts of the village where her family farmed. Adaeze, though modest and careful, slowly grew comfortable in his presence. He once helped her lift a basket of firewood too heavy for one person. Another time, he joined her father and brothers in clearing weeds from the edge of their land, though the men kept glancing at one another in disbelief that a prince would walk under the sun beside them. Adaeze's mother watched from a distance with quiet wonder. When evening came, she said to her husband, "That young man carries no pride in his shoulders." Her husband nodded slowly. "That is why people love him." One afternoon, after helping her family gather cassava, Chidebere sat beneath a mango tree with Adaeze while birds moved above them in the branches. "Do you ever grow tired?" Adaeze laughed softly. "Of work?" "Of giving so much." She thought for a moment. "Sometimes the body grows tired, but the heart is lighter when it does good." Chidebere looked at her with deep respect. "When I am with you, the world feels quiet." Adaeze's cheeks warmed and she looked down at her hands. "My prince speaks too highly of me." "No," he said gently, "not highly enough." Their affection grew slowly, honestly, and beautifully, and soon the people began to notice. They saw how Chidebere's face softened whenever Adaeze was near. They saw how Adaeze's calm eyes carried a quiet light after speaking with him. At the market, women whispered with smiles. At the stream, girls talked while filling their pots. "They look good together," one said. "Very good," another answered. "She is humble and he is kind. It would be a blessed union." Even many elders approved. They believed that a man who would one day wear a crown needed a woman whose heart was clean, and in Adaeze they saw that goodness. But inside the palace, not every heart was pleased. Queen Nwakego, the king's second wife, watched these things with growing bitterness. She was beautiful, proud, and sharp-minded, and though she smiled when others looked at her, her heart was restless. She loved her own son, Obinna, fiercely, and wanted the throne for him. Every praise sung about Chidiebere pierced her like a thorn. Every smile the people gave him felt like a door closing against her dreams. One evening, as she stood behind a carved palace screen and watched villagers cheering Chidiebere's return from the farms, her jaw tightened. A maid standing nearby said innocently, "The people truly loved the prince." Nwakego turned slowly, her eyes cold. "Love is a dangerous thing when given too freely," she said. The maid quickly lowered her head, sensing trouble in the queen's tone. Later that night, in her chamber, lit by small oil lamps, Nwakego sat in silence while Obinna spoke proudly about his own plans and pleasures, but her mind was elsewhere. She could hear the distant joy of the kingdom outside the palace walls. She could hear servants praising Chidiebere's wisdom. She could hear women in the courtyard speaking of Adaeze as the perfect future wife for the prince. Each word fed the jealousy inside her until it grew hot and poisonous. She rose and walked into the window, looking out into the darkness. Her face was beautiful, but her eyes were hard. "As long as Chidiebere stands," she whispered to herself, "my son will remain in his shadow." Outside, Omudike still rested in peace, unaware that something dangerous had begun to grow inside the royal palace. Yet, not far away, in her father's compound, Adaeze sat under the moonlight after the day's work was done, smiling softly to herself as she remembered Chidiebere's kind voice and gentle eyes. And in his own chamber, the prince stood by an open window, looking out over the sleeping kingdom with hope in his heart, not knowing that while love was beginning to bloom quietly between them, and Adaeze kept it in her heart, jealousy had already opened its eyes in the dark. The days that followed passed with bright sunlight, busy roads, and the steady beat of life in Omudike. Yet beneath the beauty of the kingdom, something dark was beginning to move in silence. Prince Chidiebere continued to grow into the kind of leader the people already believed he would become one day. Every morning, he rose early, greeted the elders in the palace courtyard, and joined his father, King Ezeudo, in matters of leadership. He no longer spent his days only among farmers, hunters, and villagers. Now he also sat in council meetings where land matters, trade concerns, harvest planning, and border safety were discussed. The king wanted his son to learn carefully, not only from books of tradition and the words of chiefs, but from the real burdens of ruling human lives. Chidiebere listened with patience, asked thoughtful questions, and never spoke carelessly. When one chief argued for heavier taxes on traders to increase royal wealth before the new yam festival, Chidiebere shook his head and said, "A kingdom does not become strong by pressing down the people who are already working hard. If traders suffer, markets become weak. If markets become weak, families go hungry. Wealth without mercy is not wisdom." King Ezeudo looked at him with quiet pride, while several older men nodded in approval. Another day, the prince went to inspect a road being repaired between two villages after heavy rains had damaged it. He stood with workers in the heat, watching young men lift stones and older craftsmen shape the pathway with care. A foreman bowed and said, "My prince, this road should have been fixed months ago, but the rains made everything worse." Chidiebere stepped closer, looked at the muddy edges, and replied, "Then let this work not stop halfway. A road is not only earth. It is how mothers carry goods to market, how children reach learning places, and how the sick are taken for help." He asked that more hands be sent from the palace and that water and food be brought for the workers before sunset. The men cheered softly, strengthened not only by his words, but by the fact that he noticed their effort. His days became full with such duties. He visited the grain storehouses, checked on the repair of a broken village well, listened to complaints from fishermen near the river, and sat with elders who taught him the history of the throne. Yet even as his responsibilities grew, his heart remained gentle, and whenever he could, he found moments to see Adaeze. Their love was still young and careful, but it deepened with each meeting. Sometimes he visited her family compound under the excuse of checking on farm conditions nearby. Sometimes he met her near the stream where women washed clothes and filled water pots. Sometimes he simply stood under the mango tree beside her father's farmland and spoke with her while the evening breeze moved softly through the leaves. Adaize always carried herself with modesty, yet Chidiebere could see the quiet happiness in her face whenever he came. One evening, after helping her carry a basket of vegetables from the farm, he looked at her and said, "When I spend even a short time with you, the troubles of the day lose their weight." Adaize smiled shyly and answered, "Then perhaps the day also becomes lighter for me because of you." He laughed softly. "Then we are helping each other." She looked at him with warmth in her eyes and said, "Yes, I think we are." Their bond was becoming known across the kingdom, and most people spoke of it with joy. Women at the stream whispered that Adaize was a good match for the prince. Young men in the market said Chidiebere was wise to choose a woman with humility instead of pride. Even old widows in the village blessed the thought of their future together. But inside the palace, Queen Wakego heard every word, and each one fell into her heart like fire into dry grass. She had hidden her jealousy for some time behind smiles, polite greetings, and careful silence, but it was becoming harder to hide. Every time she saw Chidiebere walk beside the king and council, every time she heard palace servants praise his wisdom, every time the people cheered his name at public gatherings, she felt fear rise inside her. She feared not only his place as first son, but his goodness, because goodness won the people more deeply than power ever could. Her own son, Obina, was handsome and strong, but he was careless, proud, and too quick to anger. Nwakaego loved him fiercely, yet even she could see what others saw. Obina did not carry the patience or discipline of a future king. This truth tormented her. One late afternoon, as the sky turned orange and birds flew back to their nests, Queen Nwakaego stood on the raised palace veranda, watching Chidiebere below as he gave instructions to workers hanging decorations for the coming New Yam Festival. The festival was the most important celebration of the year, a time when the people thanked God for harvest, honored the ancestors, danced, feasted, and renewed the joy of the kingdom. Men were repairing drums, women were drying spices and pounding yam flour, children were already singing festival songs, and elders were preparing sacred rites. Chidiebere moved among the workers with calm authority, helping settle small problems and making sure everything was done well. A palace maid who stood behind the queen smiled and said, "The prince is truly gifted. The festival will be beautiful under his care." Nkaigo turned slowly and fixed the maid with a sharp stare that made the girl's smile disappear at once. "Leave me," the queen said coldly. The maid bowed quickly and hurried away. Nkaigo remained alone, her fingers tightening around the carved railing. Her face was still, but inside her, bitterness was no longer a passing feeling. It had become decision. That night, after the palace had grown quiet and most lamps had been put out, Nkaigo wrapped herself in a dark cloth and left her chamber through a rare passage known only to a few servants. She walked quickly across the shadowed courtyard, her sandals making no sound on the earth. At the back gate, a trusted servant waited with a covered lantern. Neither spoke. The servant only bowed and handed her the light. Nkaigo stepped into the darkness beyond the palace walls and followed a narrow path leading toward the forest. Crickets sang in the grass. The moon was half hidden behind moving clouds. The deeper she walked, the colder the air seemed to become. At last she reached a hidden forest shrine, an old place surrounded by thick trees, broken stones, and dark silence. There, beside a dying fire, two men were waiting. One was Chief Ngbafo, a wealthy but greedy palace chief whose loyalty belonged only to money and influence. He smiled when he saw the queen, but his smile carried no warmth. The other was a fair Dibia, old and thin, with deep eyes that seemed to hold secrets no decent man wished to know. Cowries, bones, and dark charms lay on a mat before him. The air around him felt heavy. Queen Nkaigo stepped forward. You both know why I asked for this meeting, she said. Chifungbafor folded his hand inside his robe and answered smoothly, Your Majesty has a problem, and men like us are skilled in solving problems. The Dibia gave a low sound that was not quite laughter. Some problems, he said in a dry voice, need more than skill. They need darkness. Nkaigo did not flinch. Then use whatever is needed. Chidiebere must never sit on that throne. Chifungbafor glanced at the Dibia, then back at her. Removing a prince loved by the people is not a small thing. If harm comes to him too openly, suspicion will grow. Nkaigo's eyes hardened. Then do not kill him. Destroy what stands under him. Make the people doubt him. Make the chiefs fear him. Make the king turn against him. The Dibia leaned forward slightly, his gaze narrow and piercing. You are asking for a child to be cut away from his father while he still breathes. Nkaigo replied, I am asking for my son's future, and I am willing to pay. Chifungbafor's expression brightened slightly at that word. There are many paths to shame. A stain on honor can be stronger than blood on a blade. The queen's voice dropped lower. Then find the path. The three of them spoke deep into the night. Plans were shaped in whispers. Names were considered. Weaknesses were studied. Chifungbafor knew how the council worked and which chiefs could be influenced. The Dibia spoke of fear, symbols, and the power of sacred things to turn minds against a man. By the time Nkaigo returned to the palace before dawn, the path to ruin had begun. In the days that followed, the queen moved as if nothing had changed. She greeted the king with respect, spoke gently before others, and even smiled when Chidiebere entered the royal home. But behind closed doors, she sent secret gifts to Chifungbafor and met the Dibia twice more in hidden places. Obinna knew little of the full plan, but he sensed enough to ask questions. One evening, he found his mother seated alone, watching servants polish bronze vessels for the coming festival. Mother, he said, lowering his voice, why have you become so restless? Every day you watch Chidiebere as if he has already stolen something from you. Nkaigo turned to him. He has stolen what should belong to you. Obinna frowned. The throne is still far away. Father lives. Why worry now? Because foolish people wait until the river rises before looking for higher ground, she replied sharply. Every day, Chidiebere grows stronger in the eyes of the people. Every day they speak his name as if the crown already rests on his head. Obinna's jaw tightened. And what do you intend to do? She held his gaze. What a mother must do. Obinna said nothing more. He was ambitious, but even he felt something cold pass through him at the look in her eyes. Meanwhile, Chidiebere remained unaware of the danger taking shape around him. He was too busy fulfilling his duties. The New Yam Festival was only days away, and the kingdom was alive with preparation. The royal shrine was being cleaned, sacred vessels were arranged, new yams were being selected for blessing, dancers practiced in the square, drummers tested their instruments from morning to evening. Chidiebere spent long hours helping the king oversee every part of the coming celebration. One morning in the council hall, King Ezeodu looked at his son and said with quiet pride, You carry this work well. I see patience in you and I thank God for it. Chidiebere bowed his head slightly. I only try to learn from you, father. The king smiled. That is why you learn. They walked together later that day toward the inner shrine where the sacred royal staff was kept. It was not ordinary. It was the ancient symbol of the kingdom's authority, carried by rulers during important rites and seen by the people as a sign of lawful power. The staff was carved from old wood, decorated with brass and sacred markings, and kept under close protection within the shrine. King Ezeodo paused before it, his face growing thoughtful. This staff, he said, is more than a symbol. It reminds a ruler that power is not for pride. It is a burden given by God and the ancestors. Whoever desires it for selfish reasons destroys himself before he destroys others. Chidiebere looked at the staff with respect. I understand, father. The king turned to him. Do you? Chidiebere met his eyes and answered plainly. I do not desire the throne before its time. I desire to be worthy whenever that time comes. King Ezeodo's expression softened deeply. Then may your heart remain like this. If Chidebere had known those words would soon become a source of pain to his father, perhaps he would have held the moment longer. But peace often blinds good men to the speed of evil. 2 nights later, the palace was full of movement even after sunset, because preparations for the festival had entered their final stage. Servants carried baskets, drummers practiced in outer courtyards, and guards moved through the halls with alert eyes. Sometime deep in the night, while clouds covered the moon and the palace seemed wrapped in uneasy stillness, the plan was carried out. A hidden figure entered the sacred royal shrine through a passage known only to a few. The sacred royal staff was taken. By dawn, the palace was in chaos. A shrine servant ran screaming across the corridor, drawing everyone into panic. "The staff is gone! The sacred staff is gone!" Men dropped what they were carrying. Women gasped and covered their mouths. Guards rushed toward the shrine. Drums fell silent. Within moments, the news spread like wildfire through every corridor, every compound, every market corner near the palace. The sacred royal staff had disappeared. King Ezeodo arrived at the shrine in shock, surrounded by chiefs, priests, guards, and members of the royal household. His face was pale with disbelief. "Search everywhere," he ordered. "No room, no path, no corner must be left unchecked." Chidebere stepped forward at once. "Father, I will lead part of the search." The king nodded, still too stunned for many words. The prince moved quickly through the palace with guards behind him, searching storerooms, servant quarters, courtyards, and passages. He could feel the fear around him. The loss of such a sacred object was not only theft, it was a spiritual and political wound. People whispered already of bad signs, betrayal, and rebellion. Then, before midday, the cry came. A Kalas guard burst into the corridor outside the prince's chambers and shouted, "Come quickly!" Chidebere turned sharply and followed the man inside. What he saw made him stop cold. Hidden beneath folded cloth near the corner of his room were sacred beads from the shrine, a wrapped charm, and traces of red earth used only in royal ritual spaces. For a few seconds, he could not even speak. One of the guards stared at him in open fear. Another stepped back slowly, as if the room itself had become dangerous. Chidebere's voice finally came, low and stunned. "Who brought these here?" No one answered. Chief Mbafo, who had just entered with several others, looked around with carefully performed shock. This is a terrible sight. How can sacred items from the shrine appear in the prince's own chamber? Chidebere turned to him with anger rising in his chest, because they were planted. Chief Mbafo lifted both hands slightly. "My prince, these are serious words. Because this is a serious crime," Chidebere snapped, "and I did not commit it." More chiefs began gathering at the doorway, murmuring among themselves. Servants looked on from outside with frightened faces. Queen Wake soon arrived, wrapped in sorrowful dignity. When she saw the items, she pressed her hand dramatically to her chest. No, this cannot be true." Chidebere looked at her sharply, but her face showed only pained disbelief. King Ezeodo was called, and when he entered his son's chamber and saw the objects on the floor, something inside him seemed to break. "Chidebere," his voice heavy and strained, "tell me I am not seeing this." The prince stepped forward at once. "Father, listen to me. I know nothing about these things. Someone has done this to destroy me." The king stared at him, torn between love and horror. But why would sacred items from the shrine be hidden here? Chidebere's heart pounded. "Because someone wants it to appear that I reached for the throne before your time, but I swear before God, before you, and before every ancestor that I have done no such thing." Chief Mbafo lowered his eyes and said in a grave voice, "Majesty, this matter is too great for private words. The chiefs must gather. The kingdom must hear judgment before fear grows worse." King Ezeodo closed his eyes for a moment, as if the weight of the palace had fallen onto his shoulders all at once. When he opened them again, they were filled with pain. "Call the chiefs," he said quietly. "There will be an emergency hearing before sunset." The hours before the hearing passed like a dark dream. The palace, once full of festival joy, had become a place of whispers, suspicion, and fear. Some servants cried openly. Some guards refused to meet Chidieberi's eyes. Others looked at him with sympathy, but said nothing, afraid to speak against what seemed like terrible evidence. In the village, people struggled to believe the rumors spreading from the palace. Impossible, one trader said at the market. Prince Chidieberi would never do such a thing. Another answered, then how did shrine items appear in his room? A third shook her head. Something is wrong, very wrong. Adaize heard the news while helping her mother sort vegetables. The basket slipped from her hands and overturned into the dust. No, she said in a trembling voice. It cannot be true. Her mother grabbed her arm gently. Child, wait. Rumors can wound before truth speaks. But Adaize's face had turned pale. I know him. He would never betray his father. By evening, the great hearing was called in the palace courtyard. Chiefs sat in a wide circle. Elders stood behind them. Guards lined the walls. Servants gathered at a distance. The sky above seemed unusually heavy, as if even the air knew sorrow had entered the kingdom. King Ezodo sat at the center, wearing not the joy of a ruler before a festival, but the grief of a father standing before shame. Chidieberi was brought forward. He was not chained, but the sight of guards at his side made the humiliation cut deeply. He stood tall, yet his heart ached with the pain of being doubted by those he had served. Queen Wakaego sat nearby with lowered eyes, hiding the secret satisfaction beneath her careful expression. Chief Mbafo rose first to speak. Your Majesty, honored chiefs and elders of Omudike, he began, we gather under a dark cloud. The sacred royal staff, symbol of the kingdom's authority, has vanished from the shrine. Sacred items connected to that theft were found in the chamber of the first prince. This matter is not small. If a son desires the throne before his father's passing, then both the house and the kingdom are in danger. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Chidieberi stepped forward and he said, I did not steal the staff. I have not dishonored my father. I have not reached for the throne before its time. I am innocent. One chief asked sternly, then how do you explain what was found in your room? Chidieberi answered, I explain it as deceit. Someone entered my chamber and planted those things there. Another chief frowned. That is a convenient claim. Chidieberi turned toward them with wounded force in his voice. Convenient? I stand before my father, accused of the worst kind of betrayal. There is nothing convenient in this shame. King Ezodo leaned forward, his face torn by grief. My son, he said, his voice almost breaking, if there's anything you know, anything hidden from us, say it now. Chidieberi looked straight at him. Father, I have hidden nothing. I am innocent. The courtyard fell quiet. For a moment, even those eager to doubt him could feel the truth in his pain. Yet, fear is a strong poison, and the sacred nature of the crime weighed heavily over every mind. Chief Mbaforo spoke again, slow and solemn. A prince's reputation may be bright, but even bright things can cast dark shadows. The evidence before us cannot be ignored. The kingdom must be protected. Those words hung in the air like stones, and there, before the gathered chiefs, before the silent palace, before a father whose heart was breaking and a kingdom trembling in shock, Prince Chidieberi stood accused of trying to seize power before King Ezodo's death. Silence fell heavily over the palace courtyard after Prince Chidieberi's last words, and for a long moment, no one moved, as if the whole kingdom had forgotten how to breathe. The evening wind that had once carried the joyful sound of festival drums now moved through the open space like a cold warning. King Ezeudo remained seated at the center of the gathering, but his body looked older than it had that morning. The weight on his face was no longer the weight of a ruler facing a difficult matter. It was the weight of a father being pushed toward a decision that would wound his own soul. Chidebere stood before him with pain burning in his chest. Yet he did not lower his head in shame because he knew he was innocent. Still, innocence was not protecting him. It stood inside him like truth trapped behind a locked door. Around them, the chiefs shifted on their seats, murmuring low words to one another. Some were troubled, some were afraid. Some hid selfish thoughts behind solemn faces. Chief Ingbefor slowly rose again, clasped his hands and spoke with the grave tone of a man pretending to protect tradition while helping destroy justice. "Your Majesty," he said, "the kingdom cannot treat this matter lightly. The sacred royal staff is still missing. Ritual items from the shrine were found in the prince's chamber. If we close our eyes because he is the first son, then law becomes weakness, and the people will believe the royal house protects itself even when guilt stands in the open." Several chiefs nodded. One older chief stroked his beard and said, "The matter is dark. If the prince is innocent, then may the truth someday show itself. But if the kingdom ignores signs tied to sacred authority, fear will spread like fire." Another chief added, "The throne must remain pure. We cannot risk unrest before the festival." Chidebere's jaw tightened. He looked from one face to another and saw how fear had eaten courage out of many men. He stepped forward one more time and his voice rang through the courtyard, firm, wounded and alive with truth. "You speak of purity, but where is justice? You speak of fear, but who among you fears what is false? I have served this kingdom with open hands. I have walked among the people, defended the weak, worked beside farmers, listened to the cries of widows, and honored my father in all things. Is all that now less than a few objects placed in my room by unseen hands?" His words struck many hearts, but not enough to save him. A chief near the back lowered his eyes. Another shifted uncomfortably. King Ezeodo looked at his son with deep torment. Chidebere turned fully to him and said in a voice that shook with emotion, "Father, look at me. You know my heart. You raised me. You taught me what honor means. I would never betray you." At those words, pain flashed across King Ezeodo's face so openly that even the servants watching from a distance had to look away. Queen Nwakaego sat wrapped in quiet sorrow, acting as though the sight was unbearable to her. But inside, she was watching every reaction with cold attention. Chief Ingbefor bowed his head and said, "No father should face this, yet no king must place blood above the safety of the throne." The sentence struck like a blade. King Ezeodo closed his eyes. His breathing became heavy. He looked like a man standing between two fires, unable to save both what he loved and what he was sworn to protect. At last he spoke, and his voice sounded as if it had been dragged out of a place of pain deeper than words. "The judgment of the council," he said slowly, "must be heard." The courtyard held its breath. One of the senior chiefs stood and declared the ruling in a loud, formal voice. "Because sacred evidence tied to the theft of the royal staff was found in the chamber of Prince Chidebere, and because the prince now stands under the shadow of attempting to claim royal power before his father's death, the council judges that he must be removed from Umudike. He shall be banished from the kingdom, stripped of place within the royal house, and sent beyond the borders so that the throne may remain protected from further dishonor." Gasps rose from different corners of the courtyard. A few women covered their mouths. Some guards looked down in shock. Chidebere stood still, but it felt as if the ground beneath him had cracked open. The words entered his chest like cold iron. For a moment, he could not speak. He only looked at his father. King Ezeodo's hands trembled on the arms of his seat. It was clear that the king did not want this, yet he had allowed it. That pain cut deeper than the judgment itself. Chidebere's voice came low and broken when he finally spoke. "You are sending me away." King Ezeodo rose slowly to his feet. His eyes were full of tears he was struggling not to let fall before the court. My son. And even that one word sounded torn apart. If I stand against the council now, the kingdom may break into factions. Fear will spread. The sacred order of the throne will be questioned. His voice failed him for a second. He swallowed hard and tried again. I pray that wherever you go, truth will follow you. Chidiebere stared at him in disbelief and heartbreak. Truth is here now. It stands before you. The king flinched as if struck, but no words came that could repair what had been done. Guards were called, not because Chidiebere resisted, but because judgment had to appear complete. Iron chains were brought, and when the metal touched his wrists, a cry escaped from somewhere in the watching crowd. It was the cry of someone whose heart had broken at the sight. Chidiebere looked down at the chains as though he could not believe such disgrace had reached him. A prince once honored by all now stood bound like a criminal. Adaize, who had pushed her way through the gathering after hearing what the council had done, arrived just in time to see the guards fastening the chains. Her breath caught sharply in her throat. "No!" she cried, her voice cutting through the courtyard. Heads turned. She ran forward before anyone could stop her, tears already pouring down her face. "No, please, no. He did nothing." She fell to her knees before the king, trembling. "Your Majesty, please listen. He is innocent. Everyone knows the kind of man he is. Please do not send him away." Her voice shook so badly that some of the women nearby began to weep with her. Queen Wakaego frowned inwardly, but kept her face arranged in sorrow. King Ezeudo looked at Adaize and saw not only a village maiden in pain, but the reflection of his own failure shining back at him through her tears. "Child," he said softly, his voice heavy with grief, "this matter has gone beyond my heart." Adaize turned desperately toward Chidiebere. The guards were already beginning to move him away. She rushed to him and caught his chained hands in both of hers. "This cannot be the end," she cried. "Tell them again. Tell them you are innocent." Chidiebere's face was filled with pain, but his voice remained gentle with her even in the middle of his humiliation. "Adaize, look at me." She looked up at him through tears. "Do not let this darkness destroy you." "How can it not?" she sobbed. "They are taking you away from me." He lifted his bound hands as much as he could and touched her fingers. "Listen to me. No lie lives forever. Do you hear me?" Adaize shook with grief. "I hear you, but my heart cannot bear this." Chidiebere swallowed hard. He could feel his own tears threatening now. Not from fear of exile, but from the pain of leaving behind the people and places that had shaped his life, and above all, the woman he loved. "You must be strong," he told her. "Live. Help your family. Protect your heart. I will carry your memory wherever I go." Adaize pressed her forehead against his chained hands and whispered through her tears, "I will wait for you. I do not care how long. I will wait." Those words shook him deeply. He closed his eyes for one moment, holding them in his soul like something sacred. Then the guards pulled him away. Adaize stumbled after them, crying his name again and again as they led him through the palace gate and down the main road. People had gathered along the path in silence and horror. Some bowed their heads as he passed, some whispered prayers, some openly wept. Others stood in stunned disbelief, unable to match the man they knew with the chains they were seeing. Chidiebere walked with all the dignity he had left, though each step away from Omodike felt like a part of his life was being torn from him. He passed the village square where he had settled disputes. He passed the market where traders once greeted him with joy. He passed the road that led toward Adaize's family compound. He passed fields where farmers had smiled at his promises of help. Every place seemed to watch him leave. At the kingdom's border, where the earth path narrowed into unfamiliar land, the guards stopped. Their leader unlocked his chain linking his wrists to theirs, but left the iron on him. "The judgment is done," the man said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. "Do not return unless the kingdom itself calls for you." Chidiebere looked back one final time. In the far distance, he could see the outline of Umudike under the fading light of evening. Home, father, love, honor, all behind him. He stood there for a few long seconds, his chest tight with grief so sharp it almost stole his breath. Then he turned away and walked into exile. Back in Umudike, the days that followed were thick with sadness. The New Yam Festival, which should have filled the kingdom with joy, went ahead in a broken and quiet way. The decorations remained, the drums sounded, and food was prepared, but happiness had drained out of the celebration like water from a cracked pot. People sang because tradition demanded it, but their hearts were not in it. Even those who had accepted the council's judgment could not ignore the emptiness left by Chidiebere's absence. Adaize moved through those first days like someone carrying an invisible wound that would not stop bleeding. She still woke early, she still swept the compound, fetched water, pounded cassava and helped her mother prepare meals. She still went to the farm with her father and brothers, cutting stems, pulling weeds and gathering cassava roots into baskets. But nothing felt the same. Work no longer gave her peace. Songs no longer reached her heart. Laughter from other girls sounded far away, as if it belonged to a world she could no longer enter. Sometimes, while lifting a basket, she would suddenly remember Chidiebere helping her do the same, and tears would rush into her eyes before she could stop them. Sometimes, she would hear footsteps on a path and turn quickly, only to feel the pain of disappointment when it was not him. Her mother watched her with deep concern. One afternoon, while they were peeling cassava together under the shade of a tree, her mother said softly, "My daughter, you must eat more. You are growing weak." Adaize kept her eyes on her hands. "Food enters my mouth, but it does not stay in my heart." Her mother sighed sadly. "Pain is heavy, but life does not stop moving." Adaize's voice trembled. "Then life is cruel." Her mother reached for her hand. "No, life is hard. There is a difference." At village gatherings, Adaize tried to appear calm, but grief stayed close to her. When women sang in evening meetings, she joined quietly, though her voice often broke. When children played around her, she smiled for their sake, yet the smile never stayed long. People pitied her because everyone knew how deeply she had loved the prince. Some women tried to comfort her, others whispered that time would heal her. A few even suggested new suitors might help her forget, but Adaize's heart rejected such thoughts immediately. One day, after a gathering near the market square, a kind older woman touched her shoulder and said, "Child, you are young. Do not tie your whole life to sorrow." Adaize answered with calm pain, "My sorrow is tied to a good man. That is why it does not leave me." Meanwhile, inside the palace, Queen Owakego allowed herself secret satisfaction. She had won. The path before her son looked clearer now than it ever had before. But because she was too clever to rejoice openly, she hid her victory behind carefully measured sadness whenever others were present. She lowered her eyes, sighed in public, and spoke of the pain of division within the royal family. Yet, in private, her true feelings showed. One night in her chamber, with only her most trusted maid beside her, she looked into a polished bronze mirror and smiled faintly. "The shadow is gone," she said. The maid hesitated, then asked carefully, "Your Majesty, do you truly believe the danger has passed?" Nwakaego's eyes glittered. A tree cut from its root does not still threaten the forest. The maid bowed, but fear touched her heart. There was something chilling in Nwakaego's calm. Obinna too enjoyed Chidiebere's fall, although his satisfaction was less controlled. He became bolder, louder, more confident in the palace. He sat longer in spaces once shared by the prince. He spoke with more entitlement. He began behaving as though the future had already turned toward him. Yet, even in victory, he was not fully at ease. One evening, he asked his mother, "Do you think father will ever truly recover from this?" Nwakaego answered without emotion, "Kings recover from what they must." But King Ezeldo did not recover. The judgment he had allowed to happen did not bring him peace. It brought him torment. At first, he continued his royal duties, but everyone close to him could see the change. His shoulders bent under unseen weight. His voice grew quieter. He no longer lingered in the courtyards where he used to speak with elders. He no longer walked through the village with easy dignity. He no longer sat at meals with appetite. More and more, he withdrew into silence. At night, he slept badly. Servants heard him walking at late hours through the halls, stopping outside Chidebere's empty chamber, then moving on again like a restless spirit in his own palace. Sometimes, he stood in the shrine for long stretches, looking at the place where the sacred royal staff had once stood, and his face would fill with pain and confusion. Though the shrine was later cleansed and the rituals completed as best as possible, the loss of both the staff and his son left a wound in him that would not close. A trusted old advisor named Uduka visited him one morning and found him seated alone near an open window staring out at nothing. "Your Majesty," Uduka said gently, "the council waits for your presence." The king did not turn immediately. After a moment, he said, "Do you think a father's heart can know what a king's duty denies?" Uduka was silent. King Ezeldo continued, his voice low and tired. "I hear his words still. I see his face. He looked at me as if I had become a stranger." Uduka stepped closer. "You acted under fear for the kingdom." The king gave a bitter, broken smile. "That is what men say when they cannot bear the truth of their own weakness." From then on, illness began to settle into his body. At first, it was only tiredness. Then came loss of appetite, sleeplessness, headaches, and long periods of silence. Palace healers prepared herbs, roots, and bitter drinks. They prayed over him, rubbed medicinal oils into his skin, and urged him to rest. But the sickness did not truly come from the body. It rose from grief, regret, and the deep wound of a conscience that could not forget. Seasons passed. The bright energy that had once filled Umudike under King Ezeodo's reign slowly faded. He appeared less often at public events. When he did, the people could see that he had grown thin and weak. His smile no longer reached his eyes. The farmers noticed he no longer visited the fields. The traders saw that he stopped walking through the market. The elders whispered that sorrow was eating him from within. In the palace, he spent more and more time alone. He no longer joined long council meetings. He delegated duties he once handled personally. He sat for hours in his private chamber or beneath the shade tree in the inner courtyard, saying little. Sometimes he asked servants to leave him entirely. Sometimes he called for no music, no visitors, no discussion. Queen Nwakaego watched all this with mixed feelings. Part of her felt uneasy seeing the king fade so quickly, but ambition still ruled her. She comforted him when needed, spoke softly before others, and acted like a concerned wife. Yet, when she was alone, she measured the days in quiet calculation. Adaeze, though separated from the palace, heard reports of the king's illness from villagers and traders. Her heart softened for him despite everything. He loved his son, she told her mother one evening, but he let fear steal his courage. Her mother nodded slowly. That is how many tragedies begin. As the years passed, Adaeze matured into a quieter strength. Grief no longer threw her into tears every day, but it remained in her like a permanent ache. She helped her family faithfully, she worked the cassava fields, attended village gatherings, assisted the old and the poor, and kept her conduct pure and steady. Many men asked for her hand in marriage, Some were farmers, some traders, some sons of respected families. Her father, worried for her future, raised the matter more than once. "My daughter," he said gently one evening after supper, "you cannot live only by memory." Adaeze looked into the small cooking fire before answering. "Memory is not all I have." "Then what else?" he asked. She lifted her eyes slowly. "Hope." Her father sighed, but seeing the quiet firmness in her face, he said nothing more. At last, the day came when King Ezeodo could no longer rise from his bed without help. The palace grew hushed with dread. Healers came and went, elders visited and left with troubled faces. The king's breathing became weak, his body thin, and his voice no more than a low effort. In his final days, he withdrew almost completely from public life. He no longer received crowds. He did not attend council. He remained inside his chamber, surrounded by dim light, worried servants, and the shadow of a sorrow that had followed him to the edge of death. One evening, as rain clouds gathered outside and thunder rolled softly in the distance, King Ezeodo called for Oduka, his old adviser. When the man came and knelt beside the bed, the king's eyes were wet. "I failed him," Ezeodo whispered. Oduka bowed his head, unable to answer. The king's thin hand gripped the cloth on his bed. A father should have stood stronger. A king should have searched deeper. "I sent my own son into darkness." Tears slid from the corners of his eyes. "If truth lives, may it not die with me." Oduka's voice shook as he said, "May God have mercy, Your Majesty." Not long after, with the storm breaking over the palace roof and the kingdom asleep beneath rain, King Ezeodo breathed his last. By dawn, the news had spread across Umudike. Wailing rose from compounds, women cried openly, men removed their caps and bowed their heads. The people mourned him sincerely because, despite the sorrow of his final years, they still remembered the wise ruler he had once been. Adaeze wept when she heard. "He was a good king," she said through tears. Pain broke him. The palace entered mourning. Drums beat slowly. Cloths of mourning were worn. Chiefs gathered in solemn ceremony. Yet, beneath the grief, fear moved quietly through the kingdom because everyone knew what came next. The king was gone, the throne stood open, and with Chidiebre still lost in exile, the path was clear for Obina. The coronation was arranged with all the dignity and force of royal custom. The people came because they had to, but many hearts were uncertain. Obina stood dressed in rich robes, proud and shining in the center of the ceremony, while Queen Wakaigo sat nearby, her face full of controlled triumph, hidden behind ritual seriousness. Sacred words were spoken, blessings were pronounced, symbols of royal authority were placed in Obina's hands. When he was declared king, drums thundered and horns sounded across Umudike, but among the people, the sound did not carry the deep joy that had once followed King Ezeodo. It carried unease. It carried the feeling that something unfinished had just been covered instead of healed. Still, the ceremony was complete. King Ezeodo was gone, and Obina was crowned ruler of Umudike. After Obina was crowned king of Umudike, the sound of drums still echoed in the minds of the people. But the joy that should have followed a new ruler did not enter their hearts. The palace looked bright on the outside, with fine cloths hanging from high walls, guards standing proudly at the gates, and royal servants moving from one courtyard to another. Yet the air inside the kingdom had changed. It was not the peaceful air the people had known under King Ezeodo. It was tight, heavy, and uncertain. Many villagers returned home from the coronation with quiet faces. They did not say too much on the road because fear had already begun to teach them silence. Some old men shook their heads slowly as they walked with their staffs. Some women carried tired children on their backs and whispered prayers under their breath. Adaeze returned to her father's compound with her mother and brothers, her heart full of worry. She had watched Obina stand before the people in rich royal clothing, smiling as if the whole kingdom belonged to him alone. She had seen Queen Wakaego sitting nearby, calm and satisfied, her eyes sharp beneath her royal head covering. Adaive had felt a cold pain in her chest because the throne that should one day have belonged to Chidiebere now rested in the hands of the man whose mother had rejoiced in his downfall. That night, as her family sat outside after supper, nobody spoke for a long time. The fire burned low and the sound of insects filled the darkness. Her father finally sighed and said, "A new king has come. May he rule with sense." Her mother looked away and answered quietly, "Power shows the true heart of a person." Adaize stared into the fire. The orange light touched her face, showing the sadness she tried to hide. Chidiebere would never have made the people afraid, she said softly. Her father looked at her with pity and concern. "My daughter, do not speak his name too loudly now. The walls of this kingdom have grown ears." Adaize swallowed the pain in her throat. Must truth now be hidden like stolen goods? Her father did not answer at once. He looked toward the dark road beyond their compound, then said, "When a bad ruler sits on a high seat, even truth learns to walk carefully." In the first few weeks of Obina's reign, the kingdom still tried to hope. People told themselves that maybe he would settle down after the pride of his coronation passed. Some believed Queen Wakaego would guide him. Others believed the chiefs would control him if he became too harsh. But that hope began to die quickly. Obina enjoyed power too much. He liked seeing people bow low. He liked giving orders just to prove he could. He liked the sound of his own name shouted by guards and palace messengers. He no longer walked among the people like a servant of the kingdom. He rode through the village paths with armed men around him, his face proud and cold. Where King Ezeudo had listened, Obina commanded. Where Chidiebere had helped, Obina demanded. His first harsh order came before the next harvest was fully ready. Royal messengers entered the village square one morning and beat a loud gong until everyone gathered. Farmers came with muddy legs from the fields. Traders left their stalls. Women carrying water pots stopped by the roadside. Young men leaned on their hoes, weeping. The palace messenger unrolled a piece of cloth and read in a loud voice, "By order of King Obina, every farmer in Umudike must surrender a large part of the coming harvest to the royal storehouses. This is to strengthen the kingdom and honor the new reign." At once, murmurs moved through the crowd. An old farmer raised his trembling hand and said, "But the rains were not enough this season. Many crops are not strong. If we give so much, what will our children eat?" One guard stepped forward and barked, "Do you question the king?" The old man lowered his head quickly. "I am only asking for mercy." The messenger's face remained hard. "The king has spoken." From that day, fear entered the farms. When harvest time came, royal guards went from field to field, counting baskets of yams, cassava, corn and vegetables. They took more than many families could afford to use. Women cried quietly as their food was carried away. Children watched with hungry eyes. Men stood helpless, gripping their tools, but unable to fight armed guards. In one field, a young farmer named Emenike pleaded, "Please, this is all my family has. My wife just gave birth. Leave us a little more." A guard pushed him back with the end of his spear. "The king eats before the beggar," the guard said cruelly. Emenike fell to the ground and his wife screamed, but no one dared to stop the guards. News of such things spread through Omudike, and each story made the people more afraid. The markets also began to suffer. Obina placed heavy taxes on craftsmen and traders. Potters had to pay before selling clay pots. Weavers had to pay before spreading their cloth. Blacksmiths had to give money before sharpening tools. Women who sold pepper, palm oil, vegetables and cooked food were forced to pay daily market dues that were higher than before. One morning, Adaize went to the market with her mother to sell cassava flour and vegetables. The market, once full of loud greetings, laughter, bargaining, and children running between stalls, had become quieter. Many stalls were half empty. Some traders sat with worried faces, their goods spread before them, but few buyers coming. A tax collector moved from stall to stall with 2 guards behind him. When he reached Adaize's mother, he stretched out his hand. "Market tax," he said. Her mother looked up, tired and confused. "I paid 2 days ago." "Today is another day," he replied. "The king needs money for royal projects." Adaize's mother opened her small cloth purse and showed the little money inside. "If I give you this, I will return home with nothing." The tax collector shrugged. "That is not my concern." Adaize's eyes filled with anger. "How can people sell if you take everything before they even begin?" The guards turned toward her. Her mother quickly touched her arm. "Adaize, please." The tax collector narrowed his eyes. "You speak boldly for a market girl." Adaize held his gaze, but her mother's fear made her swallow her words. The woman caved, and the tax collector moved on. Adaize watched him go, her chest tight with helpless rage. "This is not leadership. This is robbery with a crown." Her mother looked around quickly. "Lower your voice, my child. Anger does not protect a person from soldiers." As weeks turned into months, Obinna grew more demanding. He wanted new royal buildings, wider palace walls, and a grand meeting hall that would make visitors fear and admire him. To build these things, he forced young men from different villages to work without reward. Palace guards entered compounds at dawn, calling names and dragging men from their homes. Some young men were newly married. Some had old parents to care for. Some were needed on family farms. None of that mattered. They were taken to carry stones, cut wood, mix clay, dig foundations, and raise walls under the hot sun. Food was poor, rest was little, and punishment came quickly for anyone who complained. One day, Adaize's younger brother returned from one of the work sites with bruises on his back and dust covering his body. He dropped near the doorway, exhausted. Adaize rushed to him. "What happened to you?" she cried. He winced as she touched his shoulder. "A guard beat me because I stopped to drink water." Their mother covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Their father's face hardened with pain. "This kingdom is becoming a prison," he said. Adaize cleaned her brother's wounds with warm water, her hands shaking from anger. Chidiebere used to stand with workers. He used to make sure they had food and rest. Her brother closed his eyes. "Chidiebere is gone." The words struck her deeply. She looked away, but her voice remained firm. Gone does not mean forgotten. As life became harder, Adaize's family, like many others, struggled to survive. Their farmland still produced food, but after the king's collectors took their share, little remained. Adaize worked harder than before. She rose before dawn, swept the compound, fetched water, helped her mother prepare cassava, went to the farm, carried firewood, and still found time to help old widows who had no children nearby. But beneath her strength, her heart was lonely. At night, when the compound grew quiet, sometimes she sat outside and looked toward the far roads that led beyond Umudike. She wondered where Chidiebere was. She wondered if he was alive. She wondered if he had food, shelter, and peace. Sometimes hope lifted her. Sometimes fear tried to crush her. But she held on to his last words, that no lie lived forever. Her loyalty did not please everyone. Suitors continued to come. Some came with gifts of palm wine, cloth, and food. Some came through family friends. Some came because they had loved her quietly for years and believed time had made her ready to move on. Her father tried to be patient, but he worried about her future more deeply as the kingdom worsened. One evening, a respected trader came with his relatives to ask for her hand. He was not a bad man. He spoke politely, praised her character, and promised to care for her in these hard times. Adaize served the visitors water as tradition required, then sat quietly while the elders spoke. After they left, her father called her aside. "My daughter," he said gently, "I know you want my good. Then listen to me. Years have passed and Chidiebere has not returned. Nobody knows if he is alive. The words hurt her, but she did not turn away. My heart knows what it promised. Her father rubbed his forehead with tired fingers. Promises made in sorrow can become chains. Adaize's voice shook, but it did not break. This one is not a chain, it is love. Her mother, sitting nearby, wiped her eyes quietly. Her father stared at her for a long time, then sighed. I fear that this love will bring you suffering. Adaize answered softly. I am already suffering. Marrying another man will not heal me. It will only make me false. Her father had no answer to that. The matter might have remained a family sorrow, but Obinna himself soon turned his eyes toward Adaize. At first, he noticed her during public gatherings. She did not try to attract him. She did not dress for his attention or smile in his direction. In fact, her calm distance angered him. He was used to people bending before him. He was used to women lowering their eyes in fear or admiration. But Adaize carried herself as if his crown did not own her soul. That troubled him, then interested him, then slowly became obsession. One afternoon, during a village meeting called to announce more royal taxes, Obinna sat under a decorated canopy while the people stood before him. Adaize stood beside her mother near the back, holding a small basket. Obinna's eyes found her again and again. After the meeting, he sent a palace servant to call her forward. Her mother gripped her arm in fear. Be careful, she whispered. Adaize walked forward slowly and bowed respectfully, though her heart was beating fast. Obinna looked at her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. You are Adaize? He said. Yes, your majesty, she replied. I hear many things about you. She kept her face calm. I am only a simple village woman. Obinna leaned back. Simple things can still be beautiful. Adaize's stomach tightened with discomfort. Thank you, your majesty. He studied her carefully. You have refused many men. She did not answer. His smile sharpened. Do you still hold your heart for an exiled man? The words struck the crowd with shock, but nobody dared to react openly. Adaize lifted her eyes and answered quietly. My heart is my own, your majesty. Obinna's face changed for just a second. Pride and anger flashed across it before he covered them. A heart can be guided by wisdom, he said. Sometimes even commanded by destiny. Adaize bowed again. May destiny be kind to all of us. She stepped back after being dismissed, but she could feel his eyes on her even as she returned to her mother. From that day, Obinna's interest became dangerous. He sent gifts to her family compound, fine cloth, beads, smoked meat, and jars of oil. Adaize's father refused them respectfully. The palace servants returned displeased. Soon after, tax collectors came more often to their farm. Then guards began to question their workers. Then a boundary dispute was suddenly raised against part of their land, a piece of rich farmland her family had used for many years. Her father went to the palace to defend his claim, carrying old witness names and proof from elders. But the officials refused to listen. One palace officer said coldly, "The land now belongs to the crown." Her father's face filled with shock. "That land feeds my family." The officer shrugged. "Then your family must find another way to eat." When he returned home and told them, Adaize's mother burst into tears. Her brother sat silent, their fists clenched. Adaize stood very still, feeling both guilt and anger rise inside her. "This is because of me," she whispered. Her father turned sharply. "No, this is because of a wicked king." But the punishment did not stop. Obinna sent word that Adaize should come to the palace and accept his favor. She refused. Her father, frightened but proud, supported her. "My daughter will not be taken like a goat from the market," he said. "She is a human being." Those words reached the wrong ears. A few days later, guards arrived at their compound before sunrise. They came with hard faces and spears in their hands. Adaize's mother stepped outside first and froze. "What is this?" she asked. The leader of the guards answered, "We have orders to bring your husband to the palace." Adaize's father came out, tying his wrapper properly. "For what crime?" The guard replied, "You will answer before the king's men." Adaize rushed forward. "He has done nothing." The guard pushed her back with his arm. Her father looked at her, his eyes full of love and warning. Stay calm. Do not give them more reason to harm us. Her mother began to cry. Please, he is an old man. Tell us what he has done. The guards did not listen. They bound his hands and led him away. Adaize followed for several steps, tears burning her eyes. Father, she cried. He turned his head slightly and called back. Take care of your mother. Be strong. Those words broke something inside her, but she did not collapse. She stood in the dusty road watching until the guards disappeared with him. Later, they learned he had been thrown into prison for disrespecting royal authority and refusing the king's will. With their best farmland seized and their father imprisoned, Adaize's family fell into deeper suffering. They sold what little they could in the market. Adaize and her mother carried small goods to neighboring villages, walking long roads under the sun to sell cassava flour, vegetables and firewood. Sometimes they returned with only a few coins. Sometimes they returned with nothing. Her brothers took small labor jobs, repairing fences, clearing bushes and carrying loads for traders. The once stable family now lived day by day, stretching food, hiding tears, and praying for strength. Yet Adaize did not break. Her grief became quiet fire. Each night, after caring for her mother and the younger ones, she sat outside under the sky and held on to the memory of Chidebere not as a weak dream, but as the last proof that good people had once stood in Umudike. She missed him more than words could carry, but now her longing was mixed with a deeper pain for the whole kingdom. The people were hungry. The markets were dying. Young men were being used like animals. Families were being punished for pride they did not show. And in the palace, Obina sat on the throne, growing more cruel because no one had yet found the courage to stop him. As Adaize looked into the darkness beyond her compound one painful night, with her father locked away and her family struggling to survive, she whispered with tears in her eyes, Chidebere, wherever you are, may God keep you alive. This kingdom needs truth again. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying no answer, and Umudike slept under the rule of a king who had turned his people's home into a place of fear. Far away from Umudike, beyond many forests, rivers, hills, and strange villages, Chidebere was still alive, but he was no longer the broken prince who had walked out of his father's kingdom in chains. The years of exile had changed him in many ways. The soft hands that once touched farm leaves and carried village baskets had become hard from holding weapons, lifting heavy shields, climbing rocky paths, and fighting for survival. His face had grown more serious, his shoulders broader, and his eyes deeper, as if they had seen pain that words could not fully explain. Yet, his heart had not become wicked. Suffering had not turned him into a cruel man. Instead, it had made him stronger, wiser, and more careful. In the first months after leaving Umudike, he wandered like a man without a place in the world. He slept under trees, drank from streams, walked for food when kind people allowed him, and avoided saying too much about where he came from. Some nights, he woke suddenly, hearing in his mind the sound of Adaize crying his name as the guards dragged him away. Other nights, he saw his father's tired face before him and felt the pain all over again. Many times, loneliness almost crushed him. He would sit beside a small fire in the darkness and whisper to himself, I did not betray my father. I did not steal the staff. One day, truth will speak. Those words became the rope that held him from falling apart. As time passed, Chidebere found work in different villages. He helped old farmers clear fields, repaired broken fences, carried sick children across flooded roads, and protected traders who traveled through dangerous paths. One evening, while he was staying in a border village, a group of raiders attacked at night, hoping to steal goats, food, and women's goods. Many villagers ran in fear, but Chidebere did not run. He picked up a long wooden staff, stood near the entrance of a family compound, and fought with a courage that shocked everyone who saw him. He moved with speed, strength, and calmness. He did not fight like a man seeking blood. He fought like a man protecting lives. By morning, the raiders had fled, and the villagers gathered around him in wonder. An old woman touched his arm and said, "Young man, who are you?" Chidiebere lowered his eyes and answered, "Only a traveler." A warrior standing nearby shook his head. "No traveler fights like that. You have royal blood or warrior blood in you." Chidiebere gave no answer, but from that day, men of strength began to notice him. He was invited to train with skilled fighters from different lands. He learned how to use a sword, spear, bow, shield, and knife. He learned how to move silently in the forest, how to read footprints in mud, how to protect weak people during attacks, and how to lead frightened villagers to safety. His body became strong, but his mind became even stronger. He learned patience. He learned when to fight and when to wait. He learned that anger without wisdom could destroy the same people it wanted to save. Years passed, and the name of the wandering warrior began to spread across many places, though few knew who he truly was. Some called him the silent protector, some called him the stranger with the steady eyes. Some said he was a prince from a dead kingdom, while others said he was sent by God to defend the helpless. Chidiebere never cared for these names. He only cared about doing what was right. He helped rescue families taken by raiders. He led young men to drive away bandits from trade roads. He stood before cruel village heads who cheated widows. He shared his food with hungry children, and whenever people tried to reward him too much, he accepted only what he needed to continue his journey. Still, no matter how far he traveled, his heart always returned to Umudike. Every market drum reminded him of home. Every kind maiden carrying water reminded him of Adaize. Every old king he met reminded him of his father. Sometimes, when people praised him, the praise did not bring joy. It only remembered the kingdom where he had once been loved, then disgraced. One quiet evening in a distant village, where Chidiebere had helped defend the people from a band of thieves, he sat outside a small hut, sharpening his blade as the sun fell behind the trees. The village was calm, and children were laughing near a cooking fire. A young warrior named Dike, who had fought beside him for 2 years, came and sat nearby. "You look far away again." Chidiebere did not stop sharpening the blade. "My body is here." Dike watched him closely. "But your heart is somewhere else." Chidiebere gave a sad smile, and a man does not forget the place where his life was broken. Dike waited, hoping he would say more, but Chidiebere fell silent. He had never told the full story of his exile. Only a few people knew he was once a prince. Most knew only that he carried sorrow like an old wound. That night, as the village slept, an old man was brought to Chidiebere by 2 travelers who had found him weak near the road. His clothes were torn, his feet were swollen, and his breathing was heavy. His hair was white, his back bent, and his face looked like someone who had suffered a long journey with little food or rest. One of the travelers said, "He kept asking for the warrior from Umudike. We did not understand, but someone told us you once spoke of that kingdom." Chidiebere's heart suddenly began to beat faster. He stepped closer to the old man and held the small lamp near his face. For a moment, he could not breathe. Though age and suffering had changed him, Chidiebere recognized him. The old servant had once served in the palace of King Ezeudo. He had swept the inner court, carried messages, and worked near the royal shrine. Chidiebere knelt beside him quickly. "Elder Madu," he said, his voice shaking. "Is it you?" The old servant opened his tired eyes slowly. Tears gathered in them when he saw Chidiebere's face. "My prince," he whispered. Chidiebere felt the words curse his heart. No one had called him that in so many years. He held the man's hand gently. "What happened? How did you find me?" The old servant tried to sit, but pain forced him back. I have been looking for you for many moons, he said weakly. I followed stories from village to village. They said there was a warrior who protected the helpless, a man with the heart of a prince. I knew it had to be you. Chidiebere's eyes filled with deep worry. Why did you leave Omudike? Tell me what happened. The old servant's breathing grew rough. Daike brought water and helped him drink. After a moment, the old man looked at Chidiebere with fear, sorrow, and urgency. You must listen before my breath leaves me. Chidiebere leaned closer. I am listening. The old servant gripped his hand with surprising strength. You were innocent. The sacred royal staff was not taken by you. It was Queen Wakaego. She planned everything with Chief Mbakfo and the feared shrine man. They planted the sacred items in your room. I saw more than they knew. I was near the back passage that night. I heard whispers. I was afraid. I kept silent because they threatened anyone who spoke. But my silence has burned my soul for years. Chidiebere froze. It felt as if the world had stopped moving. The old pain he had carried for years suddenly opened wider, but now truth stood inside it. His voice came low and heavy. Are you sure? The old man began to cry. I am sure, my prince. I should have spoken when your father was alive. I should have saved you, but fear made me small. After King Ezeudo died, things became worse. Obina now rules with cruelty. The people suffer. Farmers lose their harvest. Young men are forced to work. Adaize's family has suffered because she refused the king. Her father has been thrown into prison. At the mention of Adaize, Chidebere's face changed completely. Pain, love, fear, and anger passed through his eyes at once. Adaize, he whispered. She is alive. Yes, the old servant said. She never forgot you. She refused all men. Obina wants her, but she still holds your name in her heart. Chidebere bowed his head as tears filled his eyes. For years he had tried to make peace with not knowing if she had moved on, if she was safe, if she had forgotten him for her own survival. Now he learned that she had waited, and that waiting had brought her suffering. The guilt nearly crushed him. I left her in pain, he said. The old servant shook his head weakly. No, you were taken from her. There is a difference. Chidebere looked toward the darkness beyond the hut, and his voice became firm. And my father. The old servant's eyes softened with sorrow. He died with regret. He knew in his heart that something was wrong. Grief ate him slowly. Before he died, he wished truth would not die with him. Chidebere closed his eyes, and for a long moment he said nothing. The memory of King Ezeudo standing before him in the palace courtyard returned with painful sharpness. He remembered the broken voice, the trembling hands, the eyes filled with love and fear. He had carried anger toward his father for years, but now that anger melted into grief. Father, he whispered, you suffered too. The old servant's breathing became weaker. He pulled a small cloth bundle from inside his torn garment and pushed it into Chidiebere's hand. Take this. I carried it from Omudike. It is a piece of the truth. A charm wrapper from the same shrine man and a ring seal that belonged to Chief Mbakfo's servant. I stole it before I ran. Show it only when the time is right. Chidiebere held the bundle carefully. You have done enough. Rest now. The old man shook his head, tears sliding down his cheeks. Forgive me, my prince. Forgive my silence. Chidebere held his hand with both of his. I forgive you. Fear trapped many hearts in that palace. You came with truth before the end. That matters. A small peace touched the old servant's face. He looked at Chidebere one last time and whispered, Go home. The people need you. Then his hand grew loose, his eyes became still, and his breathing stopped. Chidebere remained beside him, unable to move. Dike stood quietly behind him, showing respect for the dead. The night felt heavy, but inside Chidebere, something had changed forever. By morning, the old servant was buried with honor outside the village, beneath a tree where birds sang softly. Chidebere stood by the grave for a long time, the small bundle of evidence hidden safely in his cloth. Dike came to his side and said, "You are going back." It was not a question. Chidebere looked toward the road leading south. "Yes." "Then I will come with you," Dike said. Chidebere turned to him. "This is my burden." Dike smiled sadly. A burden carried by one man can crush him. A burden carried by trusted hands can become a journey. Chidebere placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Thank you, but I must first enter alone. If I return openly, Obina will kill innocent people before I can act." Dike nodded slowly. "Then go like a shadow. Send word when strength is needed." Chidebere gathered his weapons, changed into rough traveler's clothing, wrapped a plain cloth around his shoulders, and covered part of his face with a dark scarf. He no longer looked like a prince. He looked like a wandering warrior. A man with no home and no name. The journey back to Umudike took many days. He passed through forests, crossed streams, slept under open skies, and avoided large roads where palace spies might travel. Each step brought back memories. He remembered leaving in chains. He remembered Adaeze's tears. He remembered the border where he had looked back at his home for the last time. Now he was returning, not as a helpless accused man, but as a warrior carrying truth. When he finally reached the hills overlooking Umudiki, he stopped and looked down. His heart tightened painfully. The kingdom was still there, but it looked tired. Some farms were abandoned, their ridges broken and covered with weeds. Roads that were once cared for had become rough and cracked. The village square looked dull, with fewer people and less laughter. Smoke rose from compounds, but not with the old joy of cooking and community. Everything seemed smaller, poorer, and afraid. Chidebere stayed hidden until evening, then entered the outer village quietly. He moved like a stranger, keeping his head low and his face partly covered. No one recognized him. The people were too tired to look closely, and he had changed too much. Near the market, he saw women sitting beside small piles of goods, their faces full of worry because buyers were few. A child cried from hunger while his mother tried to comfort him with empty hands. Two old men argued softly about taxes, then stopped when a guard passed by. Chidebere's chest burned. This was not the Umudike he had left. Later, he found a poor family near an abandoned farmland trying to cook watery soup with almost nothing inside. The mother looked weak, and 3 children sat close to the fire watching the pot as if hope itself was boiling inside. Chidebere walked toward them carefully and lowered his voice. "Mother, where is your husband?" The woman looked frightened at first, but his calmness eased her. "Taken to work on the king's building. He has not returned in 6 days. We have little food left." Chidebere looked at the children and felt pain tighten his throat. He opened his travel bag and brought out dried meat, roasted yam, and a small pouch of grain. The woman stared in disbelief. "Sir, I cannot pay." "I did not ask for payment. Feed the children." Tears filled her eyes. "Who are you?" He turned away before emotion could expose him. Only a man passing through. That night, he slept in a ruined storage hut near the edge of the village, but he did not truly rest. He listened to the sounds of the kingdom, the distant cry of a beaten man, the bark of hungry dogs, the low voices of people speaking in fear. By dawn, he had made a decision. He would not rush to the palace. He would first learn the pain of the people, gather truth, and help where he could. Over the next days, Chidebere moved through Umudike like a quiet shadow. He visited abandoned farmlands and saw crops left to rot because families had lost strength or men had been taken for forced labor. He passed the old village well and found it cracked and dirty, no longer repaired by the palace. He walked near the road he had once ordered workers to fix and saw deep holes filled with rainwater. He watched tax collectors seize baskets from women in the market. He watched royal guards threaten boys carrying firewood. Every sight cut him deeply, but he held his anger under control. One afternoon, he followed a group of traders returning from a neighboring village. They carried small bundles of cloth, palm oil, and salt. Bandits had been troubling that road for months because Obina's soldiers cared more about taking from villagers than protecting them. As the traders entered a narrow path between thick bushes, 4 bandits jumped out with knives and rough sticks. One shouted, "Drop everything or lose your lives!" The traders cried out in fear. A young woman clutched her bundle to her chest and begged, "Please, this is all I have." Before the bandits could strike her, Chidebere stepped from the trees. His face was covered, his hand resting on his sword. "Leave them," he said. The bandits turned and laughed. "And who are you?" one asked. Chidebere's voice stayed calm. "The warning before your pain." The first bandit rushed at him, but Chidebere moved faster. He struck the man's wrist, kicked another attacker back, and turned the third man's stick against him. The fight ended quickly. He did not kill them, but he left them groaning in the dust, too frightened to rise. The traders stared at him as if a spirit had saved them. One man fell to his knees. "Thank you, warrior. What name shall we praise?" Chidebere stepped back into the trees. "Praise no name. Travel safely." By evening, the story had reached the market. People whispered about a mysterious warrior who had defeated bandits on the trade road. For the first time in many months, a small spark of hope passed from mouth to mouth. Another day, Chidebere saw 2 corrupt soldiers beating a young villager near the old well because the boy had refused to give them the little money meant for his sick mother's herbs. The boy cried, "Please, I need it for medicine." One soldier raised his hand to strike again, but Chidebere caught his wrist from behind. The soldier turned angrily. "Who dares touch the king's guard?" Chidebere's eyes were cold beneath his scarf. A man who knows a coward when he sees one. The second soldier reached for his weapon, but Chidebere moved with clean force, knocking him down without drawing blood. He twisted the first soldier's arm until the man cried out and dropped the stolen coins. "Return it," Chidebere said. The soldier obeyed, trembling. "If I hear that you touch this boy again," Chidebere continued, "you will remember today as mercy." The soldiers ran, humiliated and afraid. The boy picked up the money with shaking hands. "Sir," he whispered, "how can I thank you?" Chidebere looked at him gently. "Buy the medicine. That is thanks enough." As the boy ran away, Chidebere stood alone by the broken well, his heart heavy but steady. He knew danger would grow if his actions became known, yet he could not watch innocent people suffer and do nothing. In the days that followed, food appeared quietly at the doors of hungry families. A widow found a sack of grain beside her cooking hut. A sick elder received herbs paid for by an unknown hand. Traders began moving in small groups, hoping the mysterious warrior might be near. Young men whispered about him at night. Mothers prayed for him without knowing his name. Chidebere heard the whispers, but remained hidden. He had not yet seen Adaeze, though every part of him longed to. He feared that going to her too soon might bring more danger to her family, especially with her father in prison. So he watched from a distance, gathering strength, learning the kingdom's wounds, and preparing for the right moment. One evening, as the sun lowered and the sky turned red, he stood on a quiet hill overlooking Omudike. The wind moved through his rough cloak, and the hidden evidence rested against his chest. Below him, the kingdom of his birth lay wounded but not dead. His people were afraid, but hope was beginning to stir again because of small acts done in secret. Chidebere looked toward the palace, where Obina ruled from a stolen peace, and his voice came low, filled with sorrow and determination. I have returned, not for revenge alone, but for truth, for my father's memory, for Adayaze, and for the people who still suffer. Then he turned away from the hill and disappeared into the coming night, while stories of the unknown warrior continued to spread through Umudike like the first light before morning. The stories of the unknown warrior did not die after one night. They grew stronger each day, moving from farm to farm, from market stall to market stall, from the broken village well to the quiet corners where tired men gathered after forced labor. At first, people spoke of him in whispers because fear still ruled Umudike. A woman would bend close to another woman while sorting vegetables and say, "They said he saved traders on the forest road." A young man would lower his voice beside a cooking fire and say, "I heard he faced 2 palace soldiers and made them return stolen money." An old widow would lift her tired eyes and say, "Someone left grain at my door. I did not see his face, but I know mercy visited me." The people did not know his name, but they began to feel that they were not completely forgotten. For years, Obina's cruelty had pressed them down like a heavy stone, but now, small hope was entering their hearts again. It was not loud hope, it was not careless hope. It was a careful light, hidden from the wind, protected by hands that had suffered too much to trust easily. Chidebere moved through the kingdom in secret, still dressed like a rough wandering warrior, with a dark cloth often covering part of his face. He did not stay in one place for too long. Some nights he slept in abandoned farm huts, some nights he rested in the forest. Other nights, trusted villagers quietly gave him a corner of a storage room or a mat behind their kitchens. He never asked for comfort. He asked only questions. He listened to the pain of the people. He learned which tax collectors were stealing more than the king demanded. He learned which guards beat villagers for sport. He learned which chiefs had become rich while farmers starved. He learned which palace servants still remembered the old days of King Ezeudu with tears in their eyes. Slowly, he began joining the broken pieces together. One evening, an old hunter named Okoro, who had once walked the forest with him before the exile, unknowingly met him near a hidden path where villagers had begun to leave small messages tied in leaves. Okoro had grown older, his beard thicker and his steps slower, but his eyes were still sharp. He studied the strange warrior closely and said, "You move like a man trained by hardship, but your silence carries palace pain." Chidebere kept his head low. Many men carry pain. Okoro narrowed his eyes. True, but not all men hold a spear the way you do. Chidebere did not answer. Okoro stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Who are you?" For a moment, Chidebere considered walking away, but something in the old hunter's face told him this was a man he could trust. He slowly lowered the cloth from his face. Okoro stared at him, and the color seemed to leave his face. His lips trembled before any sound came out. "My prince," he whispered. Chidebere quickly lifted a hand. "Not here, not loudly." Okoro looked around in fear, then pulled him deeper into the bushes. Tears filled the old hunter's eyes. "We thought you were dead. Some said wild men killed you. Some said you crossed the great river and never returned. But I knew in my heart that a man like you could not disappear like smoke." Chidebere's own eyes softened. "I almost did," he said quietly, "but I lived." Okoro held his shoulder firmly. "Then God has brought you back for a reason." Chidebere's face became serious. "I did not come to bring trouble to innocent people. I came to gather truth. I need men who can listen, watch, and wait." Okoro nodded without delay. "You have me." From that meeting, Chidebere's quiet work became stronger. Okoro brought him to elders who never believed the accusation against him. They met at night behind a palm wine shed, inside abandoned barns, and sometimes deep in the forest where guards would not hear them. These meetings were not loud rebellions. They were careful gatherings of wounded people trying to understand how to stand again. At one such meeting, an elderly woman who had lost 2 sons to forced labor spoke with bitterness in her voice. The king takes our food, our sons, and our sleep. Are we goats in his compound? A farmer answered, if we refuse tax, soldiers beat us. A young hunter said, if we fight openly now, they will kill our families. Chidebere stood in the shadow of a tree, listening until everyone had spoken. Then he said, anger is not enough. Anger can burn your own house if you throw it without thinking. We must gather evidence. We must know who is stealing. We must protect families first. We must turn fear into order. The people listened because his voice carried calm power. An old elder leaned on his staff and asked, warrior, why do you care so much about Umudike? Chidebere looked at him for a long moment. Because I know what this kingdom was before fear entered it, and I believe it can rise again. The elder nodded slowly, as if those words had reached a deep place in him. From then on, villagers began sharing information in secret. Market women counted how much tax collectors demanded and how much they kept for themselves. Young men working on royal buildings watched which guards sold stolen food at night. Hunters followed palace messengers from a distance. Former servants quietly revealed which rooms in the palace were used for hidden meetings. Chidiebere wrote nothing where it could be found, but he kept every detail in his mind and shared only with those he trusted. Soon, small acts of resistance began. Farmers started hiding part of their harvest in forest pits before royal collectors arrived. Women agreed to close their stalls at the same time when tax collectors became too violent, leaving the market empty and useless. Young men forced into labor slowed their work together, not enough to invite immediate death, but enough to weaken the king's grand building plans. At night, secret food reached families whose men had been taken. For the first time in years, the people were not only suffering alone, they were thinking together. Chidiebere also searched for those who knew anything about the night the sacred royal staff disappeared. The old servant who died in his arms had given him important truth, but Chidiebere knew that one dying man's words would not be enough to face a whole court. He needed witnesses, signs, and proof that could stand before elders and chiefs. With Okoro's help, he found a former palace cleaner named Mamarina, who now lived quietly near the river after being sent away from palace service. She was afraid when they first came to her hut. She looked through the small doorway and said, I have nothing for thieves. Okoro answered gently, no one came to steal. We came to ask about the night the royal staff vanished. At those words, the old woman's face changed. She tries to close the door, but Chidiebere spoke softly. Mother, please. Many lives were destroyed that night. She stared at him through the narrow opening. Many mouths were also closed that night. Chidiebere lowered his face covering. Mamarina gasped and her hand flew to her chest. Prince Chidiebere, she whispered. Tears gathered in her eyes. So the dead have returned. I was never dead, he said, but lies buried me. She let them inside, though her hands shook badly. The hut was small, with clay pots, old mats, and herbs hanging from the roof. She sat down slowly and looked at the floor. I was cleaning near the inner passage that night, she began. I heard footsteps after everyone was supposed to leave the shrine area. I saw Chief Ngwafo's servant carrying a wrapped bundle. I thought it was palace business. Later, I saw Queen Wakaigo's maid waiting near the back wall. They spoke softly. I did not hear everything, but I heard the word chamber. The next morning, they said sacred items were found in your room. Her voice broke. I knew something was wrong, but people were threatened. One young guard who asked questions disappeared from duty the next week. Chidiebere's face tightened. Do you know where that guard is now? Mamarina shook her head. I heard he ran to his mother's village after being beaten. Chidiebere leaned forward. Can you stand before the people when the time comes? Fear crossed her face immediately. They will kill me. Okoro said, not if the people stand together. She looked at Chidiebere, seeing both the prince he had been and the warrior he had become. After a long silence, she whispered, "If the day is truly for truth, I will speak." Another witness came from an unexpected place, a former palace cook named Bassey, who had been dismissed after refusing to send extra food to Chief Ngbafo's private storehouse, sent word through a market woman. Chidiebere met him behind a deserted cassava mill at night. Bassey was nervous, sweating even in the cool air. "I do not want trouble." "Trouble has already eaten the kingdom," Chidiebere replied. "Speak what you know." Bassey looked around, then said, "Before the staff disappeared, Chief Ngbafo held secret night meetings. Food and drink were sent to a room near the old eastern gate. Queen Nwakaigo's personal servant came there twice. I carried palm wine once, and I heard the chief say, 'Once the staff is gone, the boy will fall.' I did not know what he meant until everything happened." Chidiebere's fists tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Why did you not speak?" Bassey's eyes filled with shame. "Because I had children. Because men with spears asked me if I loved my family. Because I was a coward." Chidiebere looked at him with tired understanding. Fear made many people silent, but silence can end. Bassey nodded, wiping his face. "If others speak, I will speak too." While secrets were gathering outside the palace, fear was also growing inside it. Reports of the mysterious warrior reached Obina again and again. At first, he dismissed them with pride. "A few frightened villagers are making stories out of smoke," he said before his guards. "Find this man and flog him in the square." But the guards failed. Each time they went out, they returned embarrassed, injured, or empty-handed. Tax collectors complained that villagers were becoming stubborn. Forced labor workers were moving slowly. Traders were traveling in groups again. Women in the market no longer trembled as quickly. Something was changing, and Obina could feel his control weakening. One afternoon, he stormed into the Queen Mother's chamber, his face dark with anger. "This warrior is turning the people against me," he said. Queen Nwakaigo sat beside a low table, sorting beads with cold patience. "Then catch him." Obina struck the table with his hand, scattering beads across the floor. "Do you think I have not tried? He appears and vanishes. He fights like 10 men. People hide him. They protect him. They are beginning to look at me with bold eyes." Nwakaigo's face became still. "Have any of your men seen him clearly?" "Some say his face is covered. Some say he has the bearing of a nobleman. Some say he speaks like—" Obina stopped. Nwakaigo looked up sharply. "Like who?" Obina hesitated, suddenly uneasy. "Like Chidiebere." The room grew cold with silence. Nwakaigo rose slowly. For years, she had believed exile had swallowed him forever. Even when rumors of a wandering warrior reached her, she had pushed away the fear. But now, the old danger stood up inside her mind. "Bring me someone who has seen him, now." By evening, a wounded soldier was dragged before her. He had been one of the men Chidiebere humiliated near the old well. Nwakaigo questioned him carefully. His height? Tall, my Queen Mother. His voice? Deep, calm, not like a common thief. His eyes? The soldier swallowed. Strong, angry but controlled. Nwakaigo stepped closer. Did he have a mark near his left brow? The soldier frowned, remembering. Yes, a small old scar. I saw it when his cloth shifted. Nwakaigo's fingers curled slowly. Leave, she said. The soldier hurried out. Obina stared at her. Mother? Nwakaigo turned, and for the first time in years, real fear showed in her eyes. He is alive. Obina's face hardened, but the fear under his anger was clear. Then we kill him. Not loudly, she snapped. Not in a way that makes him a martyr. If the people know he has returned, the ground under your throne will break. That night, Queen Nwakaigo sent for men who did not ask questions. Some were assassins who worked for gold. Others served dark spiritual men in hidden places. She also sent secretly to the same feared shrine man who had helped her years before, now older but still hungry for power and gifts. The meeting took place in a hidden house beyond the palace garden. Noakaego stood before them with firelight moving across her face. There is a warrior in Umudike. He must not live to see the next moon. One assassin asked, "Is he guarded?" "By fools who love him without knowing why. Strike when he is alone." The old shrine man smiled with broken teeth. If blade fails, fear can weaken him. Spirits can trouble sleep. Charms can draw a man into traps. Noakaego's voice was hard. Use blade, poison, trap, charm, anything, but bring me proof that he is dead. The first attack came 2 nights later. Chidiebere was returning from a secret meeting with elders when he sensed the forest had become too quiet. He stopped beneath a tree and listened. A dry leaf cracked behind him. He moved just before a blade cut through the air where his back had been. 3 men rushed from the darkness. Chidiebere drew his sword, his movement fast and controlled. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The men did not answer. One attacked low, another high, and the third tried to circle behind him. Chidiebere fought hard but did not waste strength. He struck one man's knee, disarmed another, and knocked the third against a tree. When the leader tried to crawl away, Chidiebere pressed a foot on his arm. "Who sent you?" The man spat blood and laughed weakly. "The palace fears ghosts." Chidiebere's eyes darkened. "Then tell the palace the ghost still walks." He let the man live and sent him back wounded, because fear would carry the message better than death. The second attempt was poison. A woman pretending to be a grateful villager brought him food in a covered bowl. Chidiebere might have eaten it, but a child nearby whispered, "Warrior, do not. I saw that woman talking to a palace guard." Chidiebere picked the child, poured the food onto the ground, and watched as a small dog sniffed it and quickly stumbled away. His heart tightened, not for himself, but for what desperation had forced people to do. He found the woman later crying behind a tree. "They said they would take my son if I refused," she sobbed. Chidiebere looked at her with pain, not hatred. "Go home. Hide your son tonight. Others will help you leave before morning." She fell to her knees. "Why do you spare me?" He answered quietly, "Because fear made you a weapon. I am fighting the hand that held you." The failed attacks shook the palace. Obina became more restless, shouting at guards, accusing servants, and sleeping poorly. Queen Nokego remained colder, but suspicion now followed her everywhere. Some palace servants noticed secret messengers coming and going. Some saw her meeting with men who had no honest business in the palace. A young maid overheard Obina say, "If Chidiebere reaches the people openly, we are finished." The maid told her aunt in the market, and by sunset, the whisper had traveled through 3 villages. The name Chidiebere, once spoken only with sorrow, began to return carefully to people's tongues. At first, they did not say it loudly. They said it behind closed doors, beside cooking fires, and at hidden meetings. Could it be him? One farmer asked. Could our prince have returned? An elder answered, "If it is him, then truth is nearer than we thought." Chidiebere knew the danger was rising. He could feel the palace closing in, and he knew he could no longer remain only a shadow for long. Still, more truth was needed. With Okoro, Mama Rina, Basse, and other trusted people, he began preparing witnesses for the day when secrets would have to stand in open light. One old guard was found in a distant village, living with a damaged leg from the beating he had received years before. When Chidiebere came to him, the man wept. "I was on duty near the eastern gate that night. I saw Chief Mbafo's servant carrying something wrapped in royal cloth. I challenged him, and the next day I was accused of drinking on duty. They beat me and sent me away." Chidiebere placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Can you speak before the elders?" The old guard looked afraid, then angry, then free. "I have been silent with pain for too long. Yes, I will speak." By the end of that week, the hidden fire of truth had spread beneath the whole kingdom. The villagers were still afraid, but they were no longer blind. Elders were ready to listen, hunters were ready to protect witnesses, market women were ready to carry messages, former palace servants were ready to reveal what they had seen. And in the palace, Queen Nokego could feel the secrets she had buried years ago beginning to move under her feet, like bones rising from the ground. One night, Chidiebere stood with his trusted helpers inside an abandoned barn outside the village. A small lamp burned between them. Around him were faces marked by fear, hope, guilt, and courage. Okoro spoke first. "The people are waiting. They need to know who you are." Chidiebere looked at the old hunter, then at the witnesses, then at the evidence wrapped safely beside him. His heart was heavy because the next step could bring blood, but it could also bring freedom. Not yet before the whole kingdom, but soon. First, we protect the witnesses, then we call the elders. When truth rises, it must not rise alone. Mama Rina nodded slowly. Basse wiped sweat from his brow. The old guard held his damaged leg and said, "Let the day come. I am ready." Outside, the night wind moved across Umudike, carrying whispers from huts, farms, and hidden paths. The mysterious warrior had given the people hope. The hidden witnesses had given truth a voice. And though the palace still stood tall under Obina's rule, the foundation of his power had begun to crack in secret. The secret cracking of Obina's power did not remain hidden for long, because a wicked throne can stand for many years, but once the people stop fearing it in their hearts, its legs begin to shake. In the days after Chidiebere gathered the witnesses in the abandoned barn, Umudike became restless like dry grass waiting for a spat. Farmers no longer bowed with the same broken silence when tax collectors entered their fields. Market women no longer lowered their eyes quickly when palace guards shouted. Young men forced to build Obina's grand meeting hall began to look at one another with quiet understanding. And when one guard raised a whip against a tired worker, 3 other men stepped forward at once and carried the worker away before the whip could fall. The guard shouted, "Do you want to die for disobedience?" But the men did not run. One of them answered with a shaking voice that still held courage. "We are already dying slowly." That answer moved from mouth to mouth across the worksite, and by sunset, it had reached the market, the farms, the stream, and the palace kitchens. Obina heard it before night and became wild with anger. He paced inside the royal hall, his robe moving around his legs like a storm cloud. "They dare speak like that in my kingdom," he shouted. "They eat from my land, walk on my roads, and still lift their heads against me." Queen Wakaigo stood beside a carved pillar, trying to hide the fear growing inside her. "Do not shout like a frightened boy," she said sharply. "Fear smells weakness." Obina turned on her. "Weakness? You are the one who told me to rule with strength. Now the people are becoming bold because your old crime has returned to chase us." Her eyes flashed. "Control your tongue. Control the kingdom," he snapped. "You buried Chidiebere once. Why is he walking again?" For the first time, mother and son stared at each other, not with trust, but with blame. The palace servants nearby pretended not to hear, but their ears caught enough. By morning, whispers spread that the old queen mother was afraid and that the mysterious warrior was not a stranger at all. Chidiebere knew the time had come. He could not wait for Obina to arrest the witnesses one by one. He sent word through trusted hunters, market women, and old palace servants that the elders, chiefs, village heads, farmers, traders, craftsmen, and families should gather at the great village square on the next market day. The message was simple but powerful. Truth about the stolen royal staff would be spoken before the kingdom. At first, many people trembled when they heard it. An old woman asked, "Will soldiers not kill us if we gather?" A hunter answered, "Soldiers are also sons of this land. Many of them are tired of wickedness." A trader whispered, "If we stay inside our homes forever, Obina will bury us one by one." The word spread quietly but widely, and when the chosen morning came, people began moving toward the great square before the sun had fully risen. They came in small groups at first, then in larger numbers. Farmers came with dust on their feet. Women came with babies tied to their backs. Craftsmen came with rough hands hardened by work. Young men came with faces full of anger and fear. Old men leaned on staffs. Widows came with tired eyes. Even some palace servants slipped out quietly and joined the crowd at the edges. Adaeze came with her mother and brothers, her heart beating so hard she felt it in her throat. She had yet not known that Chidiebere was truly the warrior, but the rumors had reached her. She had tried not to believe too quickly because hope can hurt when it breaks, but something in her spirit had been restless for days. She looked across the crowd again and again, searching faces, searching shadows, searching for the one person she had waited for through years of pain. At the center of the square, elders sat on wooden stools while hunters stood around them for protection. Some chiefs arrived looking unsure, especially those who quietly hated Obina's cruelty but feared his guards. Chief Mbaufo came late, dressed richly, his face shiny with sweat despite the morning coolness. He looked around and saw too many people gathered, too many silent mouths ready to open. Fear moved under his skin, but he forced his voice to sound proud. "What is this madness?" he demanded. "Who called this gathering without the king's command?" An elder rose slowly and answered, "The suffering of the people called it. The blood of truth called it. The memory of King Ezeudo called it." The crowd murmured in agreement. Before Mbaufo could speak again, the sound of royal horns came from the palace road. Obina arrived with armed guards, Queen Wakaigo in a royal litter, and several loyal palace officers behind them. Obina stepped into the square with fury in his eyes. "Who among you is brave enough to challenge my throne?" he shouted. Many people stepped back, but they did not scatter. That alone shocked him. He looked around and saw faces that once bowed quickly, now staring at him with fear mixed with anger. "Answer me," he roared. "Who called this gathering?" A calm voice answered from the far side of the square. "I did." Every head turned. A tall warrior in rough clothing walked forward slowly, his face partly covered, his steps steady and fearless. The crowd parted for him without being told. Adaize's breath stopped. Something about the way he walked touched a memory so deep that her eyes filled with tears before she even saw his face. Obina's hand moved to his sword. Queen Wakego rose halfway from her seat, her face turning pale. The warrior reached the center of the square and slowly removed the cloth from his face. A cry rose from the people like wind breaking through a locked house. Some gasped, some shouted, some began to weep. Adaize covered her mouth with both hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Chidiebere," she whispered, unable to move. Chidiebere turned briefly toward her, and the look in his eyes carried years of pain, love, and apology. He wanted to go to her, but truth had to stand first. He faced the people again. "People of Umudike," he said, his voice strong enough to reach the far edges of the square. "I left this kingdom in chains because I was accused of stealing the sacred royal staff and trying to take my father's throne before his death. I have returned not as a man hungry for revenge, but as a servant of a kingdom that has suffered too long." Obina laughed harshly, though his fear showed in his tight face. "You return from exile and think stories will give you a crown?" Chidiebere looked at him calmly. "No, truth will give the people back their peace." Queen Wakaigo stood fully now. "This man is a traitor," she cried. "He was judged by chiefs. He was banished by law. Arrest him." Some palace guards moved forward, but hunters and young men stepped in front. For a tense moment, the whole square seemed ready to explode. An elder lifted his staff and shouted, "No blood before truth speaks." The guards hesitated. Chidiebere raised his hand. "Let those who know what happened speak before all." Mama Rina, the old palace cleaner, was brought forward first. Her hands shook, but her eyes had decided not to hide anymore. She looked at the crowd and began in a weak voice that grew stronger with each word. On the night the royal staff disappeared, I was cleaning near the inner passage. I saw Chief Ngbafor's servant carrying a wrapped bundle toward the prince's chamber. I also saw Queen Wakaego's maid waiting near the back wall. They spoke in secret. The next morning, sacred items were found in the prince's room. The crowd murmured loudly. Chief Ngbafor shouted, "Lies from an old woman." Mama Rina turned toward him with tears in her eyes. "You call them lies because you have eaten from them for years." Then Basi, the former palace cook, stepped forward. Sweat covered his face, but his voice did not fail. Before the theft, I carried food and drink to secret night meetings near the eastern gate. Chief Ngbafor was there. Queen Wakaego's servant was there. I heard the chief say, "Once the staff is gone, the boy will fall." I was afraid to speak then. I speak now. The crowd grew louder. Obina shouted for silence, but his voice was swallowed by anger rising among the people. Then, the old guard with the damaged leg was helped forward. He leaned on a stick and spoke with pain in every word. I challenged Chief Ngbafor's servant that night when I saw him carrying something wrapped in royal cloth. The next day, I was beaten and driven away from palace duty. I lost my place because I saw what they wanted hidden. Then, Chidiebere opened the small cloth bundle given to him by the dying palace servant. He held up the ring seal and the charm wrapper. These were carried from the palace by a servant who searched for me before he died. He confessed what fear kept him from saying for years. The seal belonged to the servant used by Chief Ngbafor. The charm wrapper came from the shrine man hired to make the lie look sacred. The people erupted in fury. Women cried out. Men cursed the betrayal. Elders covered their faces in shame and sorrow. Adaize wept openly, not only because Chidiebere was alive, but because the truth she had held in her heart had finally entered the open air. King Eziodo had died in pain because of a lie. Chidiebere had lost years of his life because of a lie. Umudike had suffered under Obina because of a lie. Queen Wakaego's mask fell. Her face twisted with fear and rage. "Fools," she shouted. "All of you are fools. Do you think kingdoms are ruled by soft hearts? My son had a right to power too." The crowd fell into shocked silence at her words. Chidiebere stared at her with deep sorrow. "So, it is true. You destroyed my father, my name, and this kingdom because of jealousy." Queen Wakaego pointed at him. "You had everything. The people loved you. The king trusted you. Even fate bowed to you. Was my son born only to stand behind you?" Chidiebere's voice became heavy. "No child is made great by another child's destruction." Obina drew his sword with a sharp sound. "Enough," he shouted. "I am king, no witness, no old servant, no dead man's bundle, and no exiled dog will take my throne." Chidiebere turned to him. "A throne taken by lies is already falling." Obina charged before the elders could stop him. The square scattered in panic as swords met with a loud clash. Chidiebere stepped back, blocking the blow with the calm strength of a trained warrior. Obina fought with anger, striking hard and fast, but his attacks were wild. Chidiebere fought with control, not wanting to kill his brother before the people. Around them, palace guards loyal to Obina rushed forward, and hunters and young men moved to stop them. The square turned into chaos. Women pulled children away. Elders were guarded by young men. Some soldiers threw down their weapons, refusing to fight for a lie. Others remained loyal and clashed with villagers. Okoro, the old hunter, stood beside the witnesses with a spear in his hand. When one palace guard tried to reach Mamarima, Okoro blocked him. "Not this one," he growled. The guard struck him across the side and Okoro fell to one knee but still drove the man back. Chidiebere saw him fall and pain flashed across his face, but Obina attacked again, forcing him to defend himself. "You think they love you," Obina snarled as their blades pressed together. "They love stories. They love weakness covered with kindness." Chidiebere pushed him back. "They love justice." Obina laughed bitterly. "Justice did not save you when you left in chains." Those words cut deep, but Chidiebere did not let pain blind him. "No," he said, "but truth brought me back." Obina attacked again with a desperate cry. The fight moved across the center of the square, dust rising around their feet. Chidebere received a cut on his arm and Adiaze cried out from the crowd, but he stayed focused. Obina slipped once, rose quickly, and charged with rage. Chidebere turned his blade aside and struck the sword from Obina's hand. The weapon spun into the dust. Obina stumbled backward, breathing hard, his royal robe torn, his face full of disbelief. Chidebere pointed his sword at him but did not strike. The crowd went silent. "Yield," Chidebere said. "Do not spill more blood." Obina looked around and saw the truth at last. Many guards had stopped fighting. Chiefs who once bowed to him were stepping away. His mother was surrounded by angry elders and women who had suffered under her plans. The people no longer saw him as untouchable. They saw him as the face of their pain. Still, pride fought inside him like a trapped animal. "I will never bow to you," he spat. He suddenly grabbed a falling knife from the ground and lunged toward Chidebere, but before he could reach him, Dike, Chidebere's warrior friend, who had secretly arrived with trusted fighters from neighboring lands, stepped from the crowd and struck Obina's hand aside. The knife fell. Chidebere moved quickly, disarmed him fully, and forced him to the ground without killing him. Obina struggled, but his strength was gone. "Bind him," one elder ordered, voice trembling with emotion. Former palace guards came forward and tied Obina. His mother, Queen Nuakego, screamed his name, but no one obeyed her anymore. She tried to stand tall, but fear had broken her pride. "You cannot do this to me. I am Queen Mother." An old woman from the market stepped forward, tears of years in her eyes. "You were mother only to your ambition. You were never mother to this kingdom." Those words struck harder than a slap. The elders ordered Queen Nuakego, Chief Mbafo, and the remaining conspirators to be held for judgment. The feared shrine man was also dragged forward by hunters who had caught him trying to flee through the forest path. With his charms scattered and his face full of terror, he looked smaller than the fear he had once created. The people watched as those who built the lie were finally brought low. But victory did not come without sorrow. Okoro had been badly wounded while protecting the witnesses. Chidebere knelt beside him, pressing cloth against his side. "Stay with me," he said, his voice breaking. Okoro smiled weakly. "Do not waste tears on an old hunter. I saw truth rise today. That is enough." Chidebere held his hand. "You stood with me when I needed courage." Okoro's eyes softened. "Then stand with the people now. Be the king your father hoped you would become." His hand grew heavy in Chidebere's grip, and his breathing faded. Chidebere bowed his head over him, grief shaking his shoulders. Adiaze came to his side then, tears on her face. For a moment they looked at each other through all the years they had lost. No crowd, no throne, no battle could hide what passed between them. She knelt beside him and whispered, "You came back." Chidebere's eyes filled. "I wanted to come back sooner." She touched his wounded arm gently. "You came back alive. That is enough for my heart today." He looked at her with deep pain and love. "You waited through suffering." Adiaze's voice trembled. "I never stopped believing you were innocent." Chidebere closed his eyes for a second, as if her words healed a wound no medicine could touch. Later that day, Adiaze's father and other prisoners jailed for refusing Obina's cruelty were released. When his father came out weak but alive, Adiaze ran to him and held him tightly, crying into his chest. "Father," she sobbed. The old man wrapped shaking arms around her. "My child, your strength kept this family alive." He then looked at Chidebere and bowed his head with tears in his eyes. "My prince, truth has returned with you." Chidebere helped him rise. No father should suffer because his daughter refused wickedness. In the days that followed, the elders and remaining honest chiefs held a public judgment. Witnesses spoke again. Queen Nuakego's crimes were fully exposed before the people. Chief Mbafo confessed after his own servant, frightened and abandoned, admitted his role in planting the evidence. Obina was stripped of power. The conspirators were removed from royal authority and punished according to the laws of the kingdom. The sacred royal staff, hidden for years in a secret chamber controlled by Chief Mbafo, was finally recovered after his confession. When it was brought out into the open, the people wept. It was not only wood and brass to them. It was the return of stolen truth. A cleansing ceremony was held, not with fear, but with sober hearts. Chidebere stood before the staff for a long time, remembering his father. "May your spirit find peace now," he whispered. "The lie has been broken." Soon after, the elders, chiefs, hunters, farmers, traders, craftsmen, widows and families gathered again in the great square. But this time the air was different. There was grief for those lost, anger for the years stolen, and pain for all that had been suffered. Yet there was hope. Chidebere did not rush to take the throne. He stood before the people in simple clothing, his arm bandaged, his face humble. "I did not return because I wanted power. I returned because truth called me home. If the people of Umudike accept me, I will serve this kingdom, not own it. I will rebuild what greed destroyed. I will listen before I command. I will remember the hungry, the weak, the widow, the farmer, the trader, the child, and the prisoner." A king who forgets the people has already lost the crown in his heart. The people answered with a roar of approval, not forced by guards, not ordered by fear, but rising freely from wounded hearts ready to heal. Chidebere was crowned king of Umudike with the recovered royal staff placed in his hands. When the staff touched his palm, he felt the weight of his father, the pain of exile, the faith of Adaize, the sacrifice of Okoro, and the suffering of the people. He did not smile proudly. He bowed his head. Adaize stood beside him, dressed with quiet beauty, her eyes shining with tears and peace. The people looked at her and remembered the woman who had waited, suffered, refused a tyrant, and kept love alive when all hope seemed gone. In the month that followed, King Chidebere began the hard work of healing Umudike. He ordered seized farmlands returned to their rightful families. He reduced taxes so traders could breathe again. He reopened the broken roads and repaired the old village well. Young men who had been forced into unpaid labor were sent home with gifts of food and tools. Prisoners held for speaking against injustice were freed. Storehouses were opened to feed families who had lost too much. Craftsmen returned to the market. Women began selling without fear. Farmers planted again, and children slowly brought laughter back to the square. Adaize walked beside Chidebere with humility and strength, visiting widows, helping organize food for poor homes, and speaking gently to women who had suffered under Obina's reign. One evening, after a long day of settling land matters and listening to the complaints of villagers, Chidebere and Adaize stood together on the palace veranda, looking out over the kingdom as smoke rose peacefully from cooking fires. The sun was setting, covering Umudike in warm light. Adaize looked at him and said softly, "The kingdom is breathing again." Chidebere took her hand, his eyes full of deep emotion. "Because many hearts refuse to let truth die." She leaned closer to him. "And because you came home." He looked toward the farms, the roads, the market, and the people moving freely below. "I came home broken, but this kingdom will not remain broken." Adaize smiled through gentle tears. "Then we will help it heal." And in time, the story of the exiled prince who returned as a warrior, exposed the lie that destroyed him, reclaimed his father's throne, and ruled with the woman who waited for him became a legend told by parents to children for generations. It became a lesson that evil plans may succeed for a while, but truth will always come out one day. Jealousy, greed, and abuse of power only bring pain and destruction, while patience, loyalty, courage, and kindness bring honor in the end. Chidebere's life shows that a good name may be attacked, but it cannot be destroyed when the heart is clean and justice is on its side. Thanks for watching this amazing story on African Stories by V. If you liked it and felt inspired, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.